Namaskar. Welcome to this special show that is Strategic Dialogue with USI. I'm Major General B.K. Sharma, Director General of USI, which is India's oldest inter-service think tank established in 1870. With me today is a special guest, Mr. Atul Singh, who is the founder, CEO, and editor-in-chief of Fair Observer, which is based in US. To hear more about his think tank, I'll request Atulji to just introduce his think tank.
Thank you, sir, for a very warm welcome. Atul Singh, I'm the founder, CEO, and editor-in-chief of Fair Observer. We are one of the few independent, non-profit world news organizations worldwide. Billionaires or governments don't own us. We have a model that publishes people from around the world. In fact, we have perspectives from over 3,000 authors from more than 90 countries. I'm also a partner at FOI that does political and geopolitical risk. General Sharma is an old and dear friend and a wise man, so it's a real honor to be here.
Thank you, Atulji. Atulji, looking at the evolving world order, I'm reminded of what Charles Dickens wrote in his book, A Tale of Two Cities in the Backdrop of French Revolution. He said, it is the best of times, it is the worst of times, everything is before us, nothing is before us. I think that characterized the very nature of the geopolitical milieu or landscape in which we are, which is underscored by what you call is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, and two more terms are added to it, that is hyperconnectivity and disruptions. So would you kindly tell us what does this world order mean and how has it evolved to its present outcast?
Well, when you said that we are going to discuss the evolution of the world order, I went back and started reading some of the international relations concepts. So I read around a bit, read Encyclopedia Britannica, read Princeton University Press, read some stuff from my alma mater, Oxford. And the more I read, the clearer the idea came to me. If you strip out the jargon, you strip out the verbiage, it's just a framework for the conduct of diplomacy and world politics. That's what it is. It's like anything, a framework. And what do we mean by that? It really means how do we arrange power and authority? Very simply. And if we want to go back to this idea of world order, we have to go back to that fateful year, 1648. Most people don't remember 1648, but 1648 occurs after the 30 Years' War in Europe. 1618 to 1648, there's a religious war in which 25 to 40% of Germany is dead. The Catholics and the Protestants fight each other to the bitter end. The only reason the war ends is because Catholic France switches over to the Protestant side because it is in French national interest. And here, politics or national interest is trumping religious interest. And so 1648 is extremely interesting because that is the foundation of the Westphalian order, because 1648 is the Treaty of Westphalia. And that is the world we live in today. And this notion of the world order, which is based on this idea of the equality and autonomy of states. For instance, you are the sovereign. Let's assume you are the sovereign you're from Jammu. So let's assume you're the king of Jammu. And let's assume, I'm the king of Varanasi. We represent our realms and we have autonomy and independence in those realms. And we sort of don't interfere in each other. Obviously, we may go to war and yada yada, and territories are exchanged. But the idea is that generally we should not trample on each other, otherwise there might be war. Now, this whole 1648 arrangement is appended after the 7 Years' War. What is the 7 Years' War? Most Indians, and indeed most Americans, where most of our readers live, are unaware that the Indian Wars, that they call, ironically, in the US and Canada, and the wars in India, which we think about, the Battle of Plassey, 1757, when Robert Clive beats Siraj ud-Dawla, they were part of the 7 Years' War, when Austria and Prussia fought an existential battle in which Prussia almost got eliminated, and England and France, UK by then, because you had 1707, the Treaty of the Union of Scotland and England and Wales, they fought this ding-dong battle all the way from Canada to India, and of course the British won. And because they won, they had spent so much money they had to tax. And within a year of that victory, they passed the Stamp Act, and the Americans rebelled and said no taxation without representation. And you get the American Revolution in 1776, and soon after you get the French Revolution, because the French helped the Americans become free, but then they have to overtax their peasantry. And of course, there's the French Revolution in which the peasants revolt. Famously, of course, Marie Antoinette said, let them have cakes if they don't have bread, and la guillotine. But at a philosophical level, challenge now is that you do have this notion of state sovereignty in question, and the French tried to export revolution, and of course that is beaten back, but the idea never really dies away. And at the end of World War I, Woodrow Wilson's ideas of collective security and the principle of self-determination clash with the principle of state sovereignty or empire sovereignty, and it's an uneasy truce. And it leads to the breakup of the Ottoman Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The Russian Empire is gone by then. It's reconstituted in the form of the Soviet Union, which is a universalist ideal, but it's not powerful enough yet to threaten outside the Eurasian landmass. And the British Empire and the French Empire actually strengthened. They expand to their zenith after World War I. Fast forward World War II, the contradictions of the Wilsonian idea. In fact, note that the US itself doesn't join the League of Nations, which is based in Geneva. And of course, you get Nazism, you get fascism, and you get a whole tumult. But at the end of World War II, you get the disintegration of the British Empire, which is very sophisticated in a way. They withdraw gradually. The French, not so gracefully. They are kicked out after the Dien Bien Phu in Vietnam, and they are kicked out later in Algeria. Those of you watching who have an interest in this subject, watch the Battle of Algiers. I think it won the Grand Prix in Cannes ages ago. And you get a world that decolonizes, the empires go, and two blocks emerge. And it is the era of the Cold War, in which I lived the first few years of my life. You saw it, because you're a little older, you saw it for longer. And the Cold War is two contending visions of the world. And one is the model of capitalism, free markets, freedom of the individual. And the other is the idea that we need justice for everyone, economic equity, and redistribution. And they contend until the Soviet model collapses, first with the collapse of the Berlin Wall, 7 November 1989, then the collapse of the Soviet Union, 31st December 1991. Once the Soviet model crumbles, then we get a world order, which is US-led, which is all about globalization, which is all about the end of history at its hubristic best. Francis Fukuyama. Of course, remember, even then, you have Samuel Huntington positing the clash of civilizations. And this order continues, ironically, only for a decade until 9/11 shatters that illusion. And then suddenly you get non-state actors, the war on terror, the Iraq war, which tramples over the United Nations. and you get walkout from the Kyoto Climate Accord, and as things go on, eventually in 2016 you get Donald Trump 1.2, you get the end of that post-war order first, which the US started at the end of World War II, and that really comes to its fruition end of 1991. That is based on the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, and in 2002, ultimately, the International Criminal Court. But all of that is gradually, or not gradually, spectacularly going out of the window by 2016, out with the Paris Climate Accords, out with the Iran Treaty that Barack Obama had negotiated, and tariffs on China, tariffs on EU, and Trump 2.0, Donald Trump 2.0 administration. We can safely say that we are now living in an era, and we are speaking after tariffs have come into force, we are living in an era where the post-World War II order is dead, the post-1991 order of globalization is gone, the rules-based order is now broken because America, the land that wrote the rules, is rewriting them. So we are now living in a completely new world, and VUCA, as you suggested, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world, is in order, and it's a brave new world.
Thank you very much for
I took too long. I'm sorry.
Elaborate explanation. Yeah.
So let me ask you, since you asked me a question, all right? Let me ask you. I've talked about, I've laid the stage of the evolution of the world order. What does Donald Trump 2.0 mean for this world order?
Yes, I think firstly, I just want to summarize that there's a wonderful book written by Brzezinski on world order, which may be of interest to our viewers.
Yes, it's.
And to put it simply, you see, the world order has gone through different phases. First, post Second World War, it was bipolar world order, which was based on ideology. You had the liberal democracy on one side and you had communist ideology on the other. And then post the Cold War came the era of unipolar world, right? In which Americans were, using the diktats like, preemption, unilateralism, US exceptionalism, universalism, and the cliches like either you are with us or you are against us. And then again, there was, the turning of the wheel of time, and you reached with the rise of China, a world order which was more of a asymmetric bipolarity. When a reigning hegemon was being challenged by a rising power.
Yeah. There is a fantastic book, the Thucydides Trap.
Thucydides Trap, that he posits about a possible war, in the balance of power. And now we are heading towards what you call is a diffused multipolarity. We'll talk about that a little later. But by looking at the chaotic world in which we are today, I'm reminded of what Lee Kuan Yew, the founder of Singapore, said.
A brilliant man, actually.
Yes.
Those of you who are interested in this should watch his interviews on YouTube.
Yeah. So he said that social behavior is guided by, the state behavior is guided by social Darwinism, where the paramount will always be the national interest, and there will be a hierarchy of power, and the major powers will be jostling for, the space and influence. So that is what he said. Now coming to Trump 2.0, I think it's a big news. Everybody is reading about it. But what it means to me, basically, I think it is all about, first, deal making, transactional diplomacy. It is about disruption, and it is about deterrence. That doesn't mean that he is going to let go US military. It will remain a very important and a potent instrument of national power. Now, it has created what you call is the centrifugal if impact within United States of America. I haven't seen United States of America, the polity so divided as it is today. So it will consume some of the unity within United States, and it has ripple effects outside for the outside world. You look at Europe, for instance. The Euro-Atlantic Alliance is totally in doldrums today, particularly post the Vice President Vance's speech at the Munich Security Dialogue, which made
Munich Security Conference,
which made the European leadership not only nervous but also very angry.
Yes.
About the future of NATO, the load sharing. There is so much of discussion. Now look at this Greenland aspiration. It is part of a NATO country. Now suppose he uses force or he establishes a military base against the NATO partner. What implications it has? Then does NATO countries except United States of America have the wherewithal to spend 2 to 5% of their GDP? Do they have the capacity to actually sort of modernize their armed forces to the pitch that they are able to, take care of European security? These are the question marks. So there is a degree of nervousness in Europe today, and they will have to make hard choices. Either to stumble along, or to accept American dictates, or to cozy up towards Russia. There could be renewal of energy supply, and even open their gates to China as far as their economic collaboration is concerned. Similar impact is on East Asia. He's made statements about Taiwan and about Japan, about the question marks about whether this Article 5 of the treaty, Americans will fulfill their security obligations or not. Consequently, there's been a triangular meet between the foreign ministers of Japan, South Korea, and China. Right? Taiwan is also about very, very nervous about to what an extent it should push the envelope of so-called independence, or should they be more subservient or more respectful towards, deferential towards China. And China has started the largest military exercise in the Taiwan state, as you know, that exercise is going on. Similar impact is on other parts of the world. But the most consequential thing that we have to watch is how do the relations between China and United States of America pan out. They're sizing up each other. Chinese have a very clear roadmap about Belt and Road Initiative and the other prongs which will facilitate Belt and Road Initiative, whereas American grand strategy is totally chaotic. Therefore, I think we are willy-nilly pushing the world into the Chinese orbit, and China may emerge as a dark horse if America is not able to put its act together.
I see. Quick question. I wrote a long piece on Belt and Road Initiative some years ago, and one of the questions I had, and I'm posing to you, where will China find the money for BRI? Because the real estate sector is in doldrums. China has over $1 trillion of, actually more, of bad debts on its bank's books. And as you know, that Chinese debt was downgraded by Fitch, I believe, only yesterday, or just a day or two ago, or maybe, certainly not today, probably yesterday or day before of our recording. Of course, by the time the viewers watch it, it will be, further back in the past.
See, Chinese may not have the kind of money that they initially wanted to invest in Belt and Road Initiative. They can always calibrate, right? Because it is one-sided relationship. They are investing money and they are taking the resources from other countries. So for them, the targets are quite fuzzy. It's not very clear target. Even if they are able to get 60%, 70% success rate, still they are a gainer in Belt and Road Initiative. So I don't think Chinese are today too much worried about the slow progress of Belt and Road Initiative. Their downside of their economy is more about internal consumption.
Yeah.
and it may hit their export markets, which is actually the lifeline of the Chinese economy. But they are doing recalibration. As you know, that earlier Xi Jinping had alienated the private sector.
Yes.
Now he's getting them on board. And there are a lot of other purges taking place. They are going through their own sets of challenges. But I'm certain that in some measure or the other, a Belt and Road Initiative will make progress, if not very rapid, but it will make a steady progress.
All right.
Now the question is, one of our operating line here was that we are talking about contested multipolarity.
Yeah.
That is where the new world order is,
Yeah.
And we talk about this fanciful word about multipolarity. What do you mean by multipolarity? How is it evolved? Can I have your views on this?
Yes, certainly. I think the bipolar world was really the Soviet Union and the USA as two poles, USSR versus USA. And it played out culturally. It played out in the Olympics. It played out in military hardware. It played out in soft power. When I was growing up, you got very cheap Russian books if you went to the Russian Cultural Center. I still remember going there as a child. And it was fantastic because you could get books on science, books on history, of course, the Russian perspective, and so on and so forth. And most importantly, that's how I discovered my love of Russian literature. I still remember reading Quiet Flows the Dawn by Sholokov, and it was magical. And there were lots of other magical authors I discovered thanks to my father, whom you know, a very learned man. But to the point, and this is to the point, that that changed and US had its unipolar mode. Now the US economy and US political leadership over time has sort of I wouldn't say necessarily declined, but has been rocky because of the yo-yoing of American politics. Once the Soviet Union collapses, the internal cohesion of the USA vanishes. Because the US, remember, is a very fractious place. It's a place that had 4 years of civil war. They had massive casualties, and they had trench warfare and quite bitter, bloody battles. Gettysburg, one of them. And you could go on. And presaged World War I in some ways. And so once the disciplining effect of Soviet Union goes away, America goes back to fractionness. So when George Bush Jr. comes, he says, out with this treaty, out with the anti-ballistic missile treaty, which Vladimir Putin resents, and out with whatever. And waterboarding comes in. Torture, which the US had outlawed during World War II, comes in, sneaks in through the back door. The new conservatives, in their own way, damage rule of law. And I'm not saying Clinton was a saint. Clinton was also, he was slick Willie for a reason. So what happens in the US is the US fractures. So people don't entirely trust the US because, okay, today you get George Bush Jr., you get X, tomorrow you get Barack Obama, you get Y. Day after you get Donald Trump 1.0, you get Z. Then you get good old Uncle Joe Biden, you get A. Then you get Trump 2.0, you get B, C, maybe D. So people think, hang on a minute. And remember, other economies have been growing. China recorded spectacular rates of economic growth. They became the workshop of the world. 2001 is the year people remember for 9/11, the September 11th attacks, both in Washington, D.C. and in New York. 2001 is important also because that is the year China enters the World Trade Organization, WTO. It's a game changer. We are living through the consequences of that. The pencils we use, the phones we have, the cameras which have been used to film us, and most likely they've all been manufactured there. So now, so another pole appears, which is China. But remember, the EU comes out with a new currency, the euro. And of course, it is Jacques Delors who pioneers it, and you can argue whether the euro was in an optimal currency unit, but the point is the EU brings together the euro and the EU. They manage a great achievement. They managed to create the world's biggest internal market. Great achievement. They managed to have a currency. So they are another pole, maybe an economic pole, not a security pole, but a very powerful economic pole. Similarly, you get other countries that may not be economically that big, and may not be as industrial, but they have a different voice at the world table or at the top table. Brazil from Latin America, they have a point of view. They also yo-yo, right? Jair Bolsonaro and Lula, but it's a big country, lots of resources, they matter. Russia continues to matter, and as Russia emerges after the chaos of the 1990s under Vladimir Putin, yes, it is an autocratic country, or yes, they have democracy, but they swing towards centralization. But they now have oligarchs buying up yachts. They have Surkin, the great spin master, who is able to manipulate reality. And as the success of Wagner has demonstrated in Africa, they've kicked out the French from Francophone Afrique. As early as the Syrian civil war, it is the Russians who saved the Assad regime. So the Russians remain an important power militarily. They start asserting themselves, particularly once they act against Georgia in Abkhazia. So lots of poles emerge, some military, some resource, and of course, not to forget India, the country we are sitting in with 1.4 billion people, the world's largest democracy. So all these different poles appear. Of course, the biggest poles are the US and China, and of course, followed by EU. And each of them is jostling for some. It's just power and authority. I mean, look, the EU Competition Commission is probably the best competition commission, and they are unafraid to take on. They're the only people unafraid to take on American giants, including internet giants. So there is this contestation happening at very, very many levels.
Okay, thank you.
So let me ask you, now that we have talked about contested multipolarity, and you have just been to Moscow. You've been to the Moscow Economic Forum. You know Russia well. You hosted the Russian ambassador here yesterday. We also had the US, I think, naval attaché, or we had
somebody
from exactly. We had somebody from the US embassy. We had the French here. We had a number of people here. So my question to you is: does contested multipolarity now have a new momentum? And what are its risks and challenges? What are its risks/challenges and opportunities?
Yeah. So I think today the most important discussion is about this contested multipolarity. Firstly, we have to understand that there is a collapse of multilateralism, what you call is a dysfunctional multilateralism. Mm-hmm. That while nation states were looking towards UN for their problem-solving solutions and United Nations Security Council for the global peace and security, but unfortunately, that organization has become comatose because of the great power rivalries there. So that actually nudged the nations in their exuberance for balance of power or external balancing, create the regional organizations. Now, regional organizations like ASEAN, G77, African Union, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, BRICS, they came to the fore and they started dealing with regional issues in a regional manner. To the extent of taking a really hostile or adversarial stance towards collective West, right? because they felt that they've been ignored and the East and the global South has been ignored. So these became the organizations which were looking at the different issues, be it, looking at alternate currency, be it looking at, dealing with the regional security issues or with non-traditional security threats, climate actions and things like that. But very recently, a very potent force emerged, and that is the global South. The idea was very much there. Now, what is global South? That basically has three continents: Asia, Latin America, and Africa. It represents nearly 85% of the world population. And during this summit, which was held here in India, G20, it became G21 because 54 nations of the African continent were included in this. So today, global South has become an idea, and there has been total redistribution of power. But most of these regional organizations are not monolithic, right? They are not very homogeneous and cohesive. Many of these are actually marked by nations bringing their bilateral issues to the fore. As a result, consensus decision making becomes a problem. For example, in Shanghai Cooperation Organization, three important countries, India, China, Pakistan, they bring the baggage of their border issues there. Likewise, say BRICS, they may be difficult to achieve a consensus in terms of, what India's position towards BRICS is vis-a-vis our interest with the West and particularly United States of America. Same is the case, you look at different countries of Africa, for example, the rivalry between Nigeria and South Africa. In Latin America, between Argentina and Brazil. So these make it extremely difficult for this multilateralism or multipolarity to take a very concrete shape. And that is why it's what we call is a contested multipolarity. But what are the opportunities that it offers us? The opportunities are that these are parallel platforms in absence of a very active United Nations, which helps in nations to discuss most of their problems and find solutions to the contemporary issues like the niche and disruptive technology, artificial intelligence, climate action, global terrorism, and trade and alternate currencies. So I think today it's a mixed bag. While there are many challenges that are existing to make these organizations highly functional, at the same time there are opportunities. Now the whole art lies in the leadership, the collective leadership, how sagacious they are and how they can reconcile these differences, align their position, and gear these organizations to a common good for the humankind.
Now, a follow-up question. In Africa, states themselves are no longer cohesive.
That's exactly what I said.
Yeah, exactly. So you said states are breaking bilateral, but even the states are breaking apart. Syria is breaking apart. So do you see this current time, just as 1919 or 1918, the Ottoman Empire disintegrated, and what came in place was the Sykes-Picot Order. Do you see this fragmenting these colonial lines in Africa and Middle East?
I think very much so, because you see, America, most of the African countries, when you look at what is happening in Haiti, in Sudan, Congo.
Haiti is in the American continent,
but
it is African slaves. Former
so
African
Haiti,
slaves.
Sudan, Congo, and all, they are going through some very vicious interstate conflicts, right?
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
these are unlikely to end. And West has its hands-off kind of an approach towards. In fact, the countries that are making inroads into Africa, I would say China, Russia, India. We are making inroads, but we are still
also UAE
and UAE, Arab countries in a very big way. So these are the problem areas. These need to be reconciled. What happens at the same time? Many countries, there is a dilemma. your security interests of most of these countries of global south are actually interconnected with United States of America. Your economic interests are mostly aligned with China. So they are on the horns of dilemma. As a result, most of the countries are hedging, balancing, rebalancing, aligning, and realigning. So the whole thing is in a state of flux. So as a result, to make some very clear-cut prediction would actually be foolish at this juncture.
Understood. Understood. I have a friend who's no more. He died a few years ago, or a couple of years perhaps, and he was Dean Justice Vamukoya, Prince Vamukoya, Luhia, who taught at Moi University, and he says one day, with the setting sun, I went to his daughter's wedding. It was a glorious African wedding, but before that, the sun was setting. He had guard dogs, and they were letting them out. Extraordinary scenes. The Red Earth of Africa. And he says, Mr. Singh, the spirit of the white man. And Mr. Singh, once the white man came to Africa, he built roads, he built bridges, he built boats, he hunted lions, he marked the continent, he created borders and administered them. And today the white man comes and lives in the expat neighborhood doing development work, and the white woman too. And if they act in conservation, and they help us against Al-Shabaab.
Yes.
Today it is the Chinese man who's building the roads, building the railways, building the ports. He is getting drunk and getting into fights. The spirit of the white man has gone into the yellow man. And I still remember that, even though he's no more.
Yeah, so that reminds me, picking up the cue from the white man. Since you live and work in US and you've been globe-trotting mostly, in the Western countries.
Not only Western, I've gone through other places too.
Yeah, but yes. My question is that what is future holding out? How do you look at it from the collective Western perspective, or particularly the US perspective? How do they see things panning out?
So, first I must tell you and our viewers and listeners that there is no collective Western perspective anymore. It's fragmented. We were sitting a few minutes earlier and I said Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall and Humpty Dumpty had a great fall, and all the king's horses and all the king's men could not put Humpty Dumpty back together again. That is the state of the West. There is no single American perspective. So if you look at the US, on the one hand, you had the Biden administration that believed in the democracy agenda. Many of them were idealists. They believed in it. Now, once you believe in it, then you have the complicated issue of how do you deal with Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
Or many of your so-called allies.
Close your eyes on Khashoggi issue.
There's a problem with moralizing too much, all right? And a lot of them genuinely believed that they were fighting for Ukraine's independence. They forgot the harsh rules of geopolitics. I mean, I always said that and Jake Sullivan is a very impressive guy and always runs meetings to time. He's tall, good-looking, dapper, good Rhodes Scholar from Oxford, my alma mater. But Jake Sullivan, and I think the rest of the Biden team, did not demonstrate hard and clear thinking. They were much better looking than Henry Kissinger, but they ain't no Henry Kissingers. Mm-hmm. Either they have to go in all in and say, okay, we'll back Ukraine, we'll give you everything, and boom, off we go. And then, okay, it's a bish bash bosh, who knows where it ends up, maybe nuclear war. Or...
Just sorry for interruption. It was not Brzezinski. It wrote Henry Kissinger.
Henry
wrote
Kissinger
the book
wrote
called
World Order.
World
Yes,
Order.
I should have corrected you.
Yeah,
That's it. Henry Kissinger wrote
Yeah,
it.
Henry
That's
Kissinger
my
wrote,
fault. Anyway, but good correction. So we are humble enough to admit our mistakes.
Brzezinski wrote the chessboard, the world chessboard.
Yeah, exactly.
The grand chessboard.
Chessboard, yeah. So now, or you made a deal with the Russians and said, okay, Ukraine won't be a part of NATO because, of course, as the Russian ambassador said, the Russian point of view is this is the gateway to Moscow, and this is part of the historic kingdom of Rus. And of course, and Crimea is something Potemkin, the great lover of Catherine the Great, conquered for his, for his monarch. And they took it from the Ottomans, lest people forget, because they needed warm water access. And Crimea is a place that Nikita Khrushchev gifted to Ukraine in 1954. So yes, there are contending narratives. Ukraine's narrative is, look, we gave away nuclear weapons and we gave it away on the guarantee of security. Fair point. Russia's narrative is, look, we took assurances by the US that NATO would not expand eastward and certainly not right into our sphere of influence, but we are being rolled back. And tomorrow, the US might want Moscow to be a liberal democracy like them. So that's also one perspective. But there was a lack of clear and hard-headed thinking in the Biden White House. And the best example of that is Afghanistan. Why withdraw in the summer in the middle of fighting season? You could wait till the passes are snowed under. And then you could have withdrawn and given some breathing room to Hamid Karzai. Although Hamid Karzai, who has the most punchable face, as a friend of mine in MI6 put it, that he has seen, was corrupt and was running a useless regime and would inevitably have fallen. After all, long before that, after the Soviets left, Najibullah fell.
On Afghanistan,
You know Afghanistan well. You're a Central Asian expert.
No, the point in Afghanistan, they say, Americans don't lose war. They lose interest.
Yes.
And we don't know how fast they can lose interest.
The Taliban had that comment, right?
Americans have the watches and we have the time.
You have the clock, we have the timer, you have the watch, we have the time.
So let's get into a little bit of a future now. How do you think things are spent?
There is no common. So the Democrats have one perspective. The Republicans, they take a different perspective. They take the other extreme. Whilst the Democrats were too ideological, and to the extent that once a junior member in the State Department lectured the Indian ambassador on gay rights. So they had gone too woke, to use that term. The Republicans have swung to the other extreme and they've become extremely transactional. What is in it for me? What is in it for us? And so we moved to this America first foreign policy. And so within Washington itself, or within the US itself, there are different views. So there is no Western view. My point is it's fractured. In the US, if we were to take the Donald Trump view, people have abused the US trading system, and there's an element of truth. Look, India is protectionist. It is really hard in India to do business, even for Indian businesses and for foreign businesses. Indian bureaucrats don't make it easy. So they see, look, we give you open access to markets and you protect your markets. Why should we do that? And so there is this sense that the world has taken America for a ride, and there's an element of truth to it. Similarly, they have this sense that America has spent too much on far too many interests, and a lot of them are not core national interests. So is Ukraine a core national interest? No. As for the Trump administration, it's China. It's China, China, China. For Democrats, they were obsessed with Russia. You could say they had the Cold War hangover. For Republicans, it is, we have to take on China and break China's back while we can. Otherwise, it'll be too late. So the worldview from the US is, if you're a Republican, we have to go through short-term pain for long-term gain to preserve whatever we can of our top dog status. And we have water, we have energy. We have technology. We have talent. We have all that we want and more. So it's about, a period of focusing inwards and building back strengthening. Now, if you were to look at the Democrats, they view it as the end of the world. My God, you've closed Voice of America. How terrible. Maybe it is terrible, but who listens to Voice of America today, right? The more important point that the Democrats are missing is they are not making the point about how the rules-based order takes decades to set up, but takes minutes to destroy, how things like WTO are important. They are not making a case for the benefit to people's pockets, but be that as it may be, they view the end of the world right now, and there's a sense of doom and gloom. And I can tell you some people who were very senior in the campaign came and drank a complete bottle of bourbon after the defeat, after Kamala Harris lost. And they talked about, where things went wrong and how things have to improve and yada yada. So in the US, if you are a Democrat, you're in doom and gloom. If you are a centrist Republican, you're distraught because you were the party of free trade. But if you belong to the Trump camp, and not just the Trump camp, even Bernie Sanders is supporting bits of the Trump agenda, then you think this is a moment where we can come up trumps and still be top dog. If you are in the UK, you're confused because you've just, in 2016, voted for Brexit. David Cameron and I had the same tutor, I can assure you. If I ever do something as rash and brash as Brexit, I would have lost my mind and you'd be entitled to kick my rear end. But it was a spectacular own goal. And now the UK finds itself caught between the devil and the deep sea. They voted for Brexit with this nostalgia for empire, perhaps, that they would negotiate free trade agreements with the rest of the world. Instead, now they have a US that has slapped 10% tariffs, which is not much, because India got hit with 27%, of course, China, Vietnam, etc. got hit with more. Mm-hmm. So the UK is now completely at a loose end as to what to do, although in the US you have people who belong to the Reform Party who like Trump and think he's doing a good job. You move further east, you get to France, you get to Germany, you get to the Netherlands, you get to especially Denmark. People are having an apoplectic fit, but some of the far-right party people support what Trump is doing. And so the collective Western view, first of all, there is no collective Western view, but in Europe largely, particularly in the establishment, there is sheer terror, absolute terror. And some people think maybe in the long run, Donald Trump is the best thing Europe needed because it will have to beef up. It'll have to invest more in defense. It will have to stop relying on American guarantees. And after all, if Russia is such a small economy, if it is as small as Belgium, then surely the Europeans shouldn't be scared of Russia. And so Europe, the status quo is broken. Europe will adjust. UK is in a tough bind. Canada and Mexico, when you go further west, and they were part of the West, even though Mexico is run largely by drug cartels outside Mexico City. In Mexico, there's this, Porfirio Diaz summed it up best, poor Mexico, so close to America and so far away from God. And Mexico is living through the effects of sanctions, and Canada is living through this nightmare of Donald Trump saying Canada could be the 51st state. So there's pandemonium. Of course, Donald Trump has won great victory by getting back Panama Canal. Because remember, Panama was flirting with China. Hutchinson Whampoa has sold its ports. So he's won victories, but even in Latin America...
The problem is we don't know the future of Panama Canal, the way the water level is sitting there.
Exactly.
It's a very big issue.
Exactly.
Right? They have to pump up water from that lake.
Yes.
And that is the cost of drinkable water.
Exactly. And one day the lake will run out of water.
Yes. So
water level is dropping. Exactly. But for now, as I said, in Latin America largely, there are a lot of left-leaning governments, Brazil, Colombia, even for the first time in its history, and there is disquiet about the U.S. Apart from Argentina, where you have Javier Milei, who's obviously a Trump supporter. He came out to gift a chainsaw to Elon Musk in London. Apart from Javier Milei, there isn't that much support. So the West at the moment stands deeply fragmented. And if I can just quickly talk about East Asia, because I was in Japan last year, Japan was drawing up scenarios of a Donald Trump victory long before he won. And I had a number of discussions in Japan about this. And Japan is extremely nervous, but they are investing in defense. As you mentioned, South Korea is nervous. They've had their own internal problems. Their president has just
president is still, impeachment and his arrests and whatnot.
And the Supreme Court upheld the impeachment judge. And so that is going on.
So in a nutshell,
everything is in flux.
Yeah, it's in a state of flux. Yeah. So we don't know, how things are likely to pan out. Yeah.
No, we don't. And since you asked me about the Western perspective, you're sitting in the United Service Institution of India, where I think it was Major General Charles McGregor who began this fine institution. None other than young husband who planned the Lhasa expedition sat here. Not exactly here, but
Field Marshal Slim has been one of our
exactly. Field Marshal Slim occupied the office you now occupied.
I'm a lesser mortal, but part of our glorious history.
Exactly. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't know about United Service Institution of India, you should look it up. It is one of India's best kept secrets. So since I'm sitting with the great Director General of USI, what is the Indian perspective on this new world of contested multipolarity? And what opportunities and risks does it bring to this vast and ancient civilizational nation?
See, I think it's an extremely important question for us. Unfortunately, we are not as vulnerable as rest of the world is. For the reason that, our economy is doing well. We are the fifth largest economy, and we may be well poised to be the third largest economy. We have, the fourth largest military force in the world, right? And fourth largest ecosystem in startups and all today. And our acceptability across the continents is very high, because we, as rightly called, we are a mix of what you call is a Mackender's heartland and also Spikeman's rimland state. So our strategic geography gives us those options, and we rightly, call ourselves as a strategic bridge between Eurasia on one hand and Indo-Pacific on the other. Now, if you look at our relationship, the world has accepted the virtue of India's strategic autonomy and multi-vector engagement. Today, United States of America has accepted us, and there is this, ISET, what you call is the Initiative for Critical and Emerging Technology Agreement. They are ready to give us the high-end military equipment. The only sticking point with US today is, this high tariff, which they call India as the king of tariffs. And there's, I think, about $45 billion of, imbalance of trade. And in lieu, they want to sell us their energy, and also maybe they will offer some of their military hardware to us. Now, this is a work in progress. We are actually negotiating that bilateral trade agreement. To what an extent it will mitigate some of our concerns vis-a-vis trade wars is a matter of detail, which, let the outcomes be there. In regard to Russia, earlier when we signed these, and China both, we signed these foundational agreements, 5 foundational agreements with US. They were virtually thinking, we're leaning towards US by looking at the pattern of our voting and the positions that we have taken on Ukraine and West Asia, they are now convinced that we very much, love and we really practice our strategic autonomy. And there's a great degree of acceptability of Indian position as far as Russia is concerned. Russia, having been shunned by Europe, have also come with their strategy of what you call pivot to Asia. And India figures out very prominently alongside China in that pivot to Asia strategy, be in terms of, industrial collaboration, be in terms of our stakes in Russia's Far East, Northern Sea routes, Arctic region, and developing this north-south trade corridor through Iran and Caspian coastline to St. Petersburg, or be it Chennai, Vladivostok corridor. They're very much excited about all that. China is still an elephant in the room, and with Chinese there has been recently thaw in our relationship on the border, and things are opening up. I think maybe there'll be certain more initiatives taken by the two sides to boost trade and address the issue of trade and imbalances. So, but yet it remains a country of concern for us. Now, given all these things at the moment, I think all that India should do is to hedge, put its own house in order, have a total reset of its strategic outlook in the light of the evolving geopolitical realities, and navigate the choppy waters of this very, very fractious, geopolitical landscape. I think our government is working in the right direction. After many, many decades after an independence, first time that we have a roadmap of what you call is Viksit Bharat, that is developed India by 2047 to be a 30 trillion economy and a developed nation in terms of more than $1,200, $1,000 of what you call is the purchasing power. And also we're talking about Atmanirbhar Bharat, self-reliant India, for which a lot of impetus is being given here in India. So on the whole, I think we are in a sweet spot, but there is a lot of footwork India has to do to reach at its rightful position in the comity of nation. And we are very hopeful and optimistic that with the right policies and strategies, we should be able to move in the right direction.
All right. On that positive and cheery note, I think we can call it a day or evening for those of you who are watching us in the evening.
Thank you very much for this fascinating thing. Every time you come here, we always look forward to be benefited from your very deep insights and very wide world exposure. Thank you, Atul.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.